Welcome back. This skull tutorial I did on TikTok got almost 2 million views. And many of you asked if I could do another skull tutorial but using the 3/4 view. I have some experience with that, so let's do it. This 3/4 view is definitely the hardest of all of the views, much harder than the profile view and certainly much harder than the front view. And the best way to make a hard drawing easy is to get down really great guidelines. So that's what we're doing here. Let's start with a square. And let's draw a line down the middle and another one along the side. They just have to be roughed in. They don't have to be perfect. You don't need to measure them out. And we're going to go through the same process one more time. Each of those squares we're going to divide into 4 squares. And we're going to end up with a total of 16 perfectly even squares. Draw this diagonal line across the 2 bottom center squares. And one line right down the middle of that first column of squares, making 2 perfectly even columns. Okay, that's it for the guidelines. We're ready to start. We're going to draw a backward C or a sideways U, whatever you prefer. And this is going to be the left eye. It's on the right side, but it's the left eye. We're going to draw a rounded triangle for the nose hole. It's actually the nasal bone at the top and the maxilla bone at the bottom. Draw the other eye socket now. It's really important to make sure that it's not as wide as the first eye socket. This will give the illusion that the skull is rotated. Really try to get this line right. This is the zygomatic bone or the cheekbone. It's really important because this is the outside of the skull. This little bone that divides your nostrils is called the vomer. Let's draw the teeth. Keep in mind that all teeth have a different shape. The ones in the front are tall and narrow. The ones in the back, the molars, are short and wide. Let's draw the zygomatic bone or the cheekbone. The bottom should be just below the center line and the top should be just above it. Now let's outline the outside of the eye socket. Okay, the skull's really starting to take shape now. Let's outline the lower jaw, also called the mandible. It's important to have a nice strong chin in your drawing. Chin is one of the things that distinguishes us from the great apes. This little U shape at the top of the jaw is called the ramus. Okay, and fill in the bottom teeth now. Same rule. The ones in the front are tall and skinny, and the ones in the back are shorter and wider. These little holes in the skull are called foramen, and they allow the cranial nerves to come through. The ones just under the eyes are called the infraorbital foramen, and the ones in the chin are the mental foramen. The squiggly line shows where the nasal bone connects to the frontal bone. And this little line shows where the zygomatic arch connects to the zygomatic bone. Let's draw the top of the skull now. You can play around with different shapes here for the forehead if you want to. You start with the frontal bone, go around to the parietal bone, that's the back at the top, and then finally finishing with the occipital bone, and that's the little part underneath as it curls back around. I'm going to make a little indication here at the very bottom where the temporal lobe would be. It's going to be shaded, so not a big deal at all. This crack that runs all the way up to the top of the skull is the coronal suture. It separates the frontal bone from the parietal bone. And some more of these little squiggly lines delineate some of the lesser known anatomy, like this sphenoid bone. Okay, now the exciting part, we get onto shading. So the general rule is, the deeper the place is, the darker it will be. We're going to start with that nose hole, make it pretty dark. Remember that there's a little bone right in the center of that hole. Don't make that too dark. Okay, let's move on to the first eye socket. So the whole thing isn't going to be the same color. What you're going to do is have the part on the right, the darkest. That's going to make it look like it's really deep. And then the part on the left side is going to be a lot lighter. And the lighter part won't appear as deep. And we're going to color in the other side as well. I'm using an H here, which is a pretty mid-level pencil. You could probably go with a softer like a 2B or even a 4B if you wanted to. Now let's create some depth under the zygomatic arch or the cheekbone. So let's fill in all of the areas that can be filled in. And I'm just very lightly shading the maxilla bone here, just so that the part with the nose sticks out a little bit more. Also very lightly shade the side of the chin and just underneath the chin. This will give it a sort of rounded off appearance that will really be convincing. And let's fill in this last gap just above the lower jaw and below the cheekbone. Okay, you're almost there. We're just going to fill in some shade by the temporal bone and the occipital bone here. and a little bit above the cheekbone to make that cheekbone really stick out. Just apply some very, very light shading to the top and the sides. That'll give it a rounded appearance. And darken the spaces between the teeth. That'll give them some three-dimensionality. And just finish things off with a pencil here with some very light touches and final shading. We'll get rid of those guidelines now, and you'll notice that I do erase some of my shading, so I'll have to go back and fix that up. If you found value in this content, please do subscribe, like, comment, and share. It really does help me out. And you don't have to go for this last step, but it really does make it pop. I have a pigment liner, but any fine marker will do. I'm just outlining all of the major lines. And that's how you draw a skull from a 3/4 view. Happy drawing, everyone.